This episode of Cider Chat is sponsored by the 3rd Annual New York International Cider Competition, where the judges are retail buyers who evaluate commercial ciders based upon category and price point. Submission forms for the February 9th, 2020 competition held in New York City can be found online at nyicidercompetition.com or at the show notes for this here episode 201 of Cider Chat.
Hello, this is Ian Merwin from Black Diamond Farm and Cider. We're located in Trumansburg, New York, in between Cayuga and Cayuga Lakes, and you are listening to Cider Chat.
Hello and welcome to Cider Chat. My name is Rhea Windcaller and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly cider podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world. This is episode 201, which is pretty fantastic, and we are going to be featuring a conversation that I had with Ian Merwin during Finger Lakes Cider Week, and we will hear him speak about what he calls the mythology about nutrients and apples. It's a humdinger of a conversation with this retired professor from Cornell University and one who will be always a forever pomologist teaching as he goes. Stay tuned for that coming up, but meanwhile, we're going to go to a wee bit of news out and about in Ciderville. Last week, I posted episode 200 of Cider Chat, and the party has not stopped in the cider house. Yippee! Yeah, the Wild Yeast are still at it. They kind of put everybody else to bed for sure. How you doing, Perry Pear?
Thank you for asking, Rhea. I'm doing fine. Medlars, can you pass me that ice pack?
You bet, Perry Pear.
Oh, Perry had a lot of fun last week. You have to pace yourself, Perry.
Indeed, I know that, Rhea, but at times you just have to let it all hang loose.
I think you've been hanging out a lot with the Wild Yeast, haven't you? So that gives you a little bit of a clue what's been going on here. The Talking Palms. I haven't heard anything from Mr. Quinch yet.
I'm here, Rhea.
Yes, you are. That just, gives you a sense of how much fun there's been in the cider house, celebrating with all the friends and all the palms coming through. It's just been a nonstop party in the cider house, which is what it normally is with cider.
Group hug!
Okay, Wild Yeast, it's time to go back into the barrel room.
Thank you, Mr. Quince, for reining us all in here. We do have a podcast to move forward to, but the Wild Yeast and all of us all know the reason why we do this every week is because we like cider, and cider equals fun. Yes, there is a reason why we do it like this. It's because we like cider, and cider equals fun. It's that sense of joy and satisfaction that we get from being in the world of cider that brings so much connectivity worldwide. So thanks to all of you who joined in the celebration over the course of last week when we released episode 200. It really meant a lot to me to be hearing from you and just be in that good cheer. It's absolutely amazing to have so many audio recordings of our story right now as we are writing it in the 21st century. And if you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, well, don't forget to do that now, because there is still a lot more fun to be had and more knowledge to be gained about the world of cider and all the good people and palms who are part of it.
Walking through the orchards, dancing in the street. picking up our feet.
Queuing up next, the Cider Swag Store.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Quince, for that reminder. There's just so much going on during this holiday season. I mean, we're in the thick of it now. Next week is Thanksgiving. The day after Thanksgiving is Black Friday. And Cider Chat now has a cider swag store at TeePublic. And there you could get all this fun cider swag on different apparel like t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops. Shoot, you could get like a coffee mug, a phone case with some fun cider swag sayings like cider equals fun or cider going up or cider up. There's more to be had there, so check it out at the Cider Chat Cider Swag Store at TeePublic. And do know that coming on Black Friday is 35% off all the different items there in the swag store. So that is a day to mark in your calendar. Mark it now. Stop the car, get off the bike, put a little note in to check it out because the holiday season's around and, you save some money on cider swag now. And you know what that means? More money to buy cider or to come on a cider tour. I'll talk about that at the end of the program. But anyways, Cider Chat Swag. It's at TeePublic. That's TEEpublic.com. Just Google it. Google TeePublic Cider Chat. You'll see it there. Or go to the link in the show notes for this year, episode 201. And I'll be looking for you out and about in Ciderville wearing your cider swag so we could raise a glass together and keep on saying, cider going up.
Going up. Going up.
Yes, it is all about cider going up, which brings us to our feature chat this week with Ian Merwin of Black Diamond Cider in Trumansburg, New York. Now, this is located in the Finger Lakes region of New York State, and that entire region has a bevy of cider houses. In fact, that's what I was doing there during Finger Lakes Cider Week, recording podcast episodes. And it was through the gracious support of Visit Ithaca, which is part of the Tompkins County and Ithaca Region Tourist Bureau, that brought me to this area to meet the makers and do these amazing conversations and then bring them forward to you. So I first would like to start there with thanking both Visit Ithaca, Redbird Cider, South Hill Cider, the Finger Lakes Cider House, and of course Bellwether Cider. You could listen to my conversation with Bill at Bellwether. That was on episode 198. And now today, my conversation with Ian Merwin at Black Diamond Cider in Trumansburg, New York. Ian Merwin has had a full life. He has lived in California, in Chile, and spent 7 months in France. In 1990, he received his PhD in Pomology at Cornell University in Ithaca. There, he both did research and taught for 27 years. In 2013, he retired, and he and his wife Jackie started Black Diamond Cider. So let's go there next and grab a glass and join this chat in the Finger Lakes region of New York State with Ian Merwin of Black Diamond Cider in Trumansburg, New York.
Our goal is to really try to make the best possible ciders and to sort of help move the art and science of cider making forward. That's really important to me. We've never pressed more than 4,000 gallons of cider. This year it'll probably be 3,500 or thereabouts because our crop we had somewhat lower crop than usual for some of the dual purpose varieties. Initially I was the cider maker. Most of our earlier blends were mine. There's a guy named Chris Negronita who started working for us in 2011 who is very smart, really interested in apple growing and cider making. His wife Alexis also works in food. She works at the Green Star Cooperative Market. She's got a good palate, and she loves picking apples and making cider. And now we have a third or fourth person, if you count me. Dominic Costa started working for us 3 years ago. He's interested in ciders and fruit growing, and he's also like a mushroom expert.
I'm going to go straight away to a question that was coming from the Heritage Cider Showcase on Facebook. It's a question from John Sturm, and he has a question about the role of nitrogen. And I get that, question coming out a lot. People are really curious about nitrogen in the orchard, and specifically to kind of, do that like low and slow fermentation. And I'm wondering, based upon your background and what you're doing, what are you doing for management of nitrogen? Is that?
I don't manage it at all. We almost never fertilize any tree in this farm, and generally, if we do, it's the very first year when they're planted, and if we have trees that had a minimal root system when we put them in the ground and it's a little dry, we'll sometimes give them a little bit of a liquid feed. You can do fish emulsion, or just we use a fair amount of wood chip compost, bark mulch.
From any kind of particular wood? It's coming from a lumber yard?
No, actually it's all from on the farm here. I'll show you the piles. Anytime we take, like we just dug 2 ponds and we had to take out a bunch of trees to dig the one behind the house, and they all get chipped.
It's all hardwood though, right? It's not pine.
Yeah, there's very little pine around here. There's white pine and like that row over there.
Okay, all right, yeah.
So the soil in this farm it's what's called a glacial till soil. It's a very young soil. Basically, it's what dropped out of the glaciers 12,000, 13,000 years ago. It's relatively high pH. There's a lot of limestone mixed up in that soil. And our whole planting system we've owned the farm for 30 years now, give or take. And nothing has been plowed on this farm. There haven't been any corn production or anything like that.
Okay.
Basically,
you came here and it was
it was all agricultural. It was 64 acres of woods. There's about 25 acres in hardwood forest. When the people sort of deforested this land back in the late 1700s, early 1800s, they were pretty smart about the way they did it. And you'll see the areas that they never clear cut are mostly poorly drained soils. So on this farm, that's a soil called Appleton. And so if there's something that's woods in this part of New York State, there's generally a good reason to keep it in woods. And that's the watershed.
Right, to watch that. It was that highly colonized here. So back in the day, it would have been, as far as you could see, all kind of clear cut.
I grew up on a farm in the Hudson Valley that dated back to the 1690s.
Wow.
And you could walk through the woods anywhere on that farm and you'd see stone walls. It was all clear cut.
Yeah.
And even stuff that shouldn't have been clear cut.
Of course. Yeah. They shipped it all overseas to
it was a lot of oak and chestnut and hickory and And the way they farmed that soil just totally exhausted it. After about 100 years, they started abandoning the less productive fields, and by the time I was living there as a kid, it was a 150-acre farm, and there was really only about 60 acres that was arable. The rest was pasture and forest, and that was from really poor farming practices. But you could fly over that farm in the winter, and you'd see there all stone walls everywhere. It had all been
beautiful.
The stone wall. There were a lot of stones in the soil,
right.
And so they built the fences as they plowed just to get the rocks out of the fields. And then when they abandoned and went back to forest, you can really see that it was agricultural land.
No doubt.
Anyway, around here it was more. This is much better farmland in this part of New York State. I mean, actually, from here to the north and all the way out to Buffalo is some of the best farmland in the eastern United States. would be here, and the Connecticut River Valley is also really good. It's good land. So
Yeah. Except
that's why I don't have to worry about nitrogen.
Right, okay.
Because the soil
Soil's good.
we've got 4.5–5% organic matter in the soil.
All right.
It's deep, it's well drained. It's called a honey oil, most of it is the name of it. It's actually the official New York State soil. Apple trees in general need very little nitrogen, unless you're trying to produce big apples to make some price point in the dessert apple market. You know, the price structure for apples and big wholesale supermarket apples is all based on size and variety. And the bigger the apple, the more you get per box, even though a box of big apples might only weigh 30 pounds, and a box of little apples, a bushel box, which is a volume measurement, might weigh 50 pounds. So there's a huge incentive for commercial dessert apple growers to produce big fruit, and the two ways they do that is nitrogen and irrigation. So we don't worry about that. I mean, we sell a lot of dessert apples to people, both locally through the farmers market, and we ship fruit through the regional access and a couple of other distributors into the surrounding major urban areas. But the apples that we sell are mostly heirloom varieties, a lot of russets, things like Northern Spy and Newtown Pippin and Golden Russet, Ashmead's Kernel, and the people who are buying that fruit aren't looking for a big red apple. They're looking for flavor and texture and something that's different. So there's really no incentive for us to try to pump our fruit up. We actually want the opposite. I want apples that are on the, medium size, medium or even lower than that. What we're interested in is really concentration of flavor.
Can I ask you what kind of scratcher you're using or grinder?
For making cider?
Yeah.
I'll show it to you. It's not a mill grinder per se. It's what's called a hammer knife.
Okay.
Which is kind of unusual. Most people are using a wheel that has a kind of a knife on it, and it spins and presses. Yeah. Ours, we like to listen to music when we make cider.
And not wear headphones?
Exactly. So ours is a grinder that's quiet, and we can listen to music while we make cider.
That's good.
So
that's
very
great.
important to us. Listen to music while we're picking as well.
But it grinds up, just for listeners to know, because that impacts the kind of apples you're talking about. Those big giant apples.
Yeah.
The
main problem we have with grinding and pressing is apples that are very ripe, which you want them that way for cider. They often have a lot of pectin, and the pressing can get a little gummy, and that's more a function of the degree of ripeness and maturity on the fruit.
Do you sweat your apples?
We do. I'll show you the room. We have a special room that I built just for. We call it the ripening room.
Ooh, the ripening room. I haven't seen many ripening rooms.
I don't know why more people don't do it. I mean, I've been really advocating it.
Okay. I don't want to go there yet because I feel like there's more to talk about here. So we'll look at the grinder, look at the ripening room.
You really have to have a ripening room if you're growing cider fruit, like the old bittersweet, French or English bittersweet, because they drop a lot of fruit before it's ripe.
They do, yeah.
And if you leave that fruit on the ground, which Steve Wood and I have argued ad nauseum about this.
Oh, Steve.
He's a firm believer and let it sit in the grass for a month. I don't know what kind of wildlife he has up there in New Hampshire, but if we leave our fruit on the ground for a month, you end up only being able to use about half of it because the mice and the woodchucks.
Interesting.
And the rabbits and the voles and the slugs and the yellow jackets and a whole bunch of other critters get right into that fruit. So the final thing on nitrogen. So our ciders have reasonably good yeast available nitrogen content just because the soil is fertile and the trees, even though we never use any nitrogen fertilizer on them,
Would you recommend nitrogen fertilizer?
It depends on your soil and depends on what kind of apples you're trying to grow.
So cider apples, we're just really talking about cider apples here.
Well, yeah, but we grow a lot of what we grow is dual purpose. Things like Ashmead's Kernel, Golden Russet, Roxbury Russet. Those are good cider apples.
They absolutely are.
They're also, and even some of the new ones.
Absolutely.
Gold Rush is a fabulous cider apple. The last two things I want to say about nitrogen, there's a lot of mythology on that topic. We actually did some research. I had a grad student named Sarah Valois, and we did research in cider varieties, bittersweet varieties, across the lake in a Cornell research farm with 3 different levels of nitrogen, 3 different rootstocks, almost all English varieties. And the amount of nitrogen that we put on the fertilizer had essentially no effect on the yeast available nitrogen in the fruit. And if you actually look back, there's 2 sources for that perception that a lot of people have.
Right. Yeah.
One is some papers that came out of France. It was an old friend of mine, retired now, Jean-Francois Drilot, was looking at nitrogen in French cider orchards and saw that as people went from the big old standard trees that were high budded, and they were basically pastures that you also pulled some apples out of, where those trees were very minimally, very little pruning, no fertilization other than the animal manure. And as the French shifted over to higher density orchards on Malwin 106 or M25 roots in the 60s to get higher production and have a little more control over fruit quality, they saw that the nitrogen content went down in the fruit. So it's really was comparing 2 very different production systems, and everything was different. The livestock was different, the rootstocks were different, the tree size was different. The fruit production per unit of land was probably double or triple in the new orchards what it was in the old. So it was kind of a very loose comparison, but they definitely, France has a big cider research program at INRA in Lelloup in Brittany. Lovely place. If you ever have a chance to visit, I highly recommend it. And that was one of the things they observed. And then Andrew Lee, whom I have great respect for, he's a friend of mine. I've known him for 20-some years. But he did a research project, and Andrew's a great biochemist, microbial biologist, cider expert, but he is not a pomologist.
And he's based in the UK, just so listeners know. Based in the UK, wrote a book that a lot of people
he's the
very giving of his
enormously generous figure who's done a lot to make cider what it is today. And he's the world expert on polyphenols in apples and cider. Written and edited several books on that topic. But he did an experiment that was, I mean, you never could have gotten it published if you were a pomology researcher. He dug up some trees on 106 rootstocks, stuck them in pots, put sand in the pots, and gave them different amounts of nitrogen. It was just barely replicated. I think he only did it for 1 or 2 growing seasons. The trees probably died when you transplant them into sand. And he noticed that the nitrogen went down, that as you fertilize them, the quality of the fruit and the polyphenol content of the fruit decreased. So it was, and Andrew, because he publishes a lot and he answers everybody's questions, he's very active on a lot of the listservs. So his work had a lot of people knew about it.
He's a strong voice out there.
Yeah. Greg Peck is in my old position at Cornell. And he's done some a little more rigorous research on it, and they're also not seeing. So it really is not well substantiated.
Yeah.
There's been very little. It certainly is true that if you abuse and overuse nitrogen and irrigation, you can diminish the fruit quality, and it isn't just a function of nitrogen. It has to do with shading in the trees and literally dilution of flavors if you irrigate late in the season. So they're definitely, it's not good to pump up your fruit size with nitrogen unless you're selling that fruit to people that want big fruit.
Big fruit,
which,
not
which
so particular
is not
in that
cider
way.
makers.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious on that. In terms of the actual process, when you're making the cider in the juice form now, you have the apples, and there's folks who really are, looking at nutrients then in that juice.
Mm-hmm.
What's any kind of correlation there between now the nitrogen in the apple and the actual juice?
Sure.
And so,
Yeah,
speak on that.
the wine, and there's lots of work in the wine industry on yeast available nitrogen and its influence on fermentation rates and H2S production, other off aromas, stuck fermentations. I mean, there's been a lot of research done on that in wine.
And like an off aroma would be like that kind of eggy.
H2S is sewer gas.
Yeah.
Rotten eggs. Yeah.
For folks who don't know anything about cider right now, once you really know.
And it's very common. It's probably the most common problem that you get with ciders and a lot of wines as well.
And it can freak people out, but.
Well, it smells bad.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nasty.
Yeah.
So we don't use any yeast nutrients. I haven't for years. The first thing I've observed when I used to use them, I mean, I did what the books say you're supposed to do.
Right.
We'd use Fermaid and Fermaid K, or diammonium phosphate, and it seemed like the more I tried to feed the yeast, the more problems we had.
You have to keep on feeding them.
Yeah, I mean, you end up with a bunch of yeast that are very inefficient. They run out of, you get this very rapid fermentation, which is the last thing you want for a white wine or a cider. And so you give them food, they eat it all up, and then they crash. And you give them more, and it just, it's really counterproductive, I think. You may have to do it if your apples, if your trees were really stressed for nitrogen and the juice was really low in nitrogen, then you might have some stressed out yeast and then of course there are the people who keeve, right? Which is not me. I think it's kind of a silly fetish. But
sometimes it's just spontaneous keep.
It'll happen often spontaneously. It used to happen to my ciders spontaneously. But you're basically starving your yeast is what you're doing.
Yeah.
And it makes sense if you have no other way to stop a fermentation and you want to stick it so that you can make a Normandy style, low alcohol, high residual sugar cider, then that's the way that we did it before we had refrigeration.
Not a fan of
no, it's a hell of a, if you want to stop the fermentation, put it in a cold room or put it in a jacketed tank and you can stop it overnight. You don't need to, and that without stressing and starving your yeast, which the more stressed the yeast are in a fermentation, the more likely are things to go wrong. And just for the record, I am not a fan, I mean, as you can tell by the way I'm talking about this whole concept of natural fermentations and wild yeast and stuff is, I think it works if you have a lot of very wealthy people who are willing to spend a lot of money for ciders that are really interesting maybe 30% of the time and are barely drinkable 30% of the time and are somewhere in between the other 30%. As a cider maker who's not selling cider to wealthy tech people in the Bay Area, I don't see.
Well, that's a big blanket of a statement there. I mean, you go into the UK.
I think it's silly,
and it's not wealthy tech people.
That's not the UK cider industry either. It is not.
Well,
you look at who makes cider, and we're not talking Tom Oliver's. We're talking Bulmers and Westons and Thatchers.
I'm not going to talk about Bulmers. They
but
have
that's the
press.
UK cider industry. By volume, that's 95% of the cider.
By volume, but I would say my listeners are more focused on the small, dry, letting it go dry and low intervention.
But you just have to realize that that's a very tiny fragment of the English cider industry.
That's fine, but we don't have to, I feel like Cider Chat and the people I'm talking to are that 1% perhaps But
well, maybe that 1% needs to hear what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I'm not going to censor myself.
I think they're growing. I think that, I think the palate's changing too. And it's kind of a missing link for cider drinkers, is that they don't know what to look for there. Like the apple's part of like our life from the beginning of our childhood on, but we don't know what that Kingston Black tastes like, or what, Dabinet, or on and on, all the beautiful cider apples that, we go for classically, or a Roxbury Russet, just single varietal Roxbury Russet. People don't know that, and the complexity in that one single varietal cider, even. And so that's a journey that I dig, totally. So I'm straight on with you there.
And I think that's where,
it's
that's
exciting.
The way the cider industry is going to evolve. You go to the ciders USACM meeting, there are all these people selling apricot nectar and apple aromas, and that's the kind of cider most people are drinking in the U.S.
Same
now.
thing happened with the craft beer industry. First off, people are making it, home brewers finally went over to the old world and saw what real beer tastes like.
I started drinking wine when I lived in Chile in the late 60s and 70s, and I moved back to California and was kind of shocked at how bad the wines were compared to the ones that, and I lived in France for 7 months before then.
You have the levity here, where you're going back and forth. You've seen the history. Most people don't come from that place.
But I think we can learn from that history of what the evolution is likely going to be.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the future of our cider market. There's people who start drinking hop cider, or Woodchuck, or Angry Orchard, or Crispin, Stella Artois, and probably 3/4 of them, some of them are already switching to hard seltzer. But some of them are going to continue drinking cider, and the longer they drink it, the more they're going to know about it, and they're going to want more and more interesting, varietal, terroir-based, real ciders. Yeah. So I think that's the future, and that's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in the...
Well, let's not talk about that anymore. Let's move on to that stuff. But I just want to say one more piece there. In the UK, it's not Bulmers that's impacting the market largest there. It's Riorkelen out of Sweden, not Bulmers. In fact, most UK, I'm probably sure they really are kind of in debt to Bulmers for planting millions and millions of trees.
I was there
and all the research.
Of
course, they're pulling up the orchards now, but those are orchards that kind of got out of the contract. But still, local farmers.
But I
thought that was interesting. Sweden, who knew?
We've had this...
I brought it back in there. I'm sorry.
I've had this discussion. People in the U.S. who are making pilgrimages to Europe to go to the cideries and to look at the cider industry, and which I did myself in the late 1997. We spent 6 months there.
Changed a lot since then.
Yeah. And the cider industry that I think that I see as a model is not the English cider industry. The English cider industry has been kind of a disaster for apple growers, and even Bulmers went bankrupt. As an industry, it's the last industry I think that we should be emulating in the United States.
I respectfully disagree, because right now I find their cider makers are the most engaged in the conversation.
But you're thinking of a very small group of cider makers that don't represent 95% of the
That's true in the
ciders.
U.S. The market that you're talking about is a very small market. The Finger Lakes is a small market for all of it. The largest...
It isn't just the Finger Lakes, though.
Yeah, I know. It's not just...
New England,
you can't compare two countries.
Puget Sound, there's the
size
Willamette
of
Valley,
the U.S. against the U.K. is...
there's good cider makers all over the U.S.
A giant country, no doubt, yeah. But I think, we're all just trying to keep on moving forward and getting that word out. And so what model do you look at then?
I don't think any of them.
I think we're all trying to do the same thing around the world right now, which just help keep lifting cider up, and celebrating the small orchard-based cideries. Let's go look at some of your equipment.
Okay.
A little walkabout here. Yes, it was time to get up and stretch our legs and clear our heads. But before we go there, I'm going to share with you my 2 cents on the tail end of this conversation we just had with Ian. before we go to the ripening room. Because as the day progressed, I really feel that my affection for this man grew and grew. And I'm not talking about a love-heart affection, although that's always part of my experience with people. It's deeper than that. It's my admiration for who he is and the work that he has done. The guy is just a treasure trove of information. It just pours out of him. You could hear that in his voice. In many ways, he reminds me of other men of his stature who have been in the cider industry for a long time. And there's a lot of passion there, and that passion is what has kept them in there for so many years. With passion, sometimes there is the high point, but there's also the low point in that it can make us a bit myopic in view and, if you will, linear in thought. And I feel that's where Ian was going. So why not get up and go for a walkabout? Because I don't want to shed any poor light on this guy who I really respect and admire. With that said, though, from my vantage, I have a very different viewpoint of cider worldwide, having had the opportunity to just be in the UK most recently in September. Having so many fantastic conversation with English cider makers to see what they're doing there with the Cider Museum in Herefordshire is outstanding from one end of the country to another. So big tip of the glass to the English cider makers and to all you who are making Kiev cider. So be it. If that's what you like, God damn it, that's what you like. And just because Ian doesn't like it, well, that's fine. He gets to drink what he wants, and it's all good in Ciderville. The other piece, though, is the question about what systems one does like. And when you don't have that answer, well, that tells me that you're really holding a lot of weight there. And I think that might be true for Dr. Merwin here. It's easy to talk about what isn't working versus what is working. And that is always the direction that we go for Ciderville. So when you're feeling low, Ciderville, just take this little bit of advice that has really worked well for me, which is when working towards success, there's no time for failure. So stay on that beat, that drum beat of success, and keep it as your motto, and keep on keeping on and helping to keep cider going up. We're going to take a little pause here, and when I come right back, we're going to be in the ripening room with Dr. Merwin of Black Diamond Cider in Trumansburg, New York.
It's a pole barn, right? So these pole, you can see the 4x4s and the corners are 4x6, and they're in the ground 4 feet. And then there's gravel and 2 inches of styrofoam insulation, and then 4 inches of concrete. And then we hire a guy who comes in. This is like a soy-based foam, what they call closed cell foam. It has a very high R value.
So not like that yellow foam that I see a lot in buildings. The soy base is going to be a little less toxic to the environment.
Yeah, I mean, supposedly it's safe. It still outgasses for a couple of days, but it's a super good insulator, and it seals the whole building. So basically, it looks like it's kind of deceptive, right? 'Cause it looks like it's not very thick, but you can.
Oh my goodness! So you just put a jackknife all the way in.
There's 4 inches of spray foam there everywhere.
That's pretty cool.
And then the doors, it's like
insulated.
A double layer door.
Yep.
And then these, of course, are when you're moving things in and out. So.
What kind of poles did you use?
Southern yellow pine.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that'll be okay going right into the concrete?
Yeah.
Is that was it?
Well, it's in the ground.
Oh, it's in the ground?
Yeah.
It won't,
they don't usually rot in the ground. They rot at the ground air level. And southern yellow pine is very rot resistant.
Yeah, it's for flooring, so.
Yeah, the trees are they're termite resistant. So
Good to know.
It's a lot of turpentine.
Good to know, yeah.
So. Anyway, this room these are all old. We've kind of tried to do everything in the cheap here, so we don't have to borrow money.
Cheap, but really well designed.
Well, that's like a 50-year-old refrigeration unit.
It's still working, right?
Well, we had to replace some stuff in them. but you can get them for next to nothing. And there's a friend of mine, Ben Guthrie, is like a refrigeration whiz. And we've sort of put it together. It works.
Yeah.
So this is your
Kingston Black.
the great apple fetish, the Kingston Black, the Holy Grail, which is the fucking pain in the ass. I hate this apple.
Biannual.
Oh, it's terrible.
And gets really heavy.
Terrible
You
apple.
have to worry about them blowing
Scab,
over.
it gets scab, they blow over, they
Yeah.
drop, they...
Yeah.
And the whole single variety cider thing is kind of another hype, I think. I'm in a hypey mood today, so.
Oh, well.
That was
we have our
started,
days. I won't hold it. Look
I
at that's pretty.
we do make a couple single and two variety ciders. We make 4 of them. This is not one of them. This is not a reliable enough apple to have a single variety on unless you had a hell of a lot of acreage of it.
How many bins do you get of the Kingston Black?
We'll
It's a
have
good year.
probably 2.
2.
And that'll increase over the years because I just planted another 50
I see.
trees of it.
Yeah.
But it's,
Now,
it does make a nice cider.
I want to go back to the single variety hype because, we were talking about earlier, I think it really provides for our cider.
Yeah, I knew we were going to have a discussion about that when you made your comments on it.
Well, hello.
So here's...
It allows you to delve into that apple, and that allows us to educate ourselves
If
instead
there are
of
a
just
few
blending.
apples, we make a single variety Geneva tremlets. We do a single variety Harry Masters Jersey, which is this bin here. And they're interesting, but I have to say most of the ciders that I've had and loved in my life have been blends. So this is why we have a ripening room. You have to have one. So this is a ripe tremlets bitter, right? You can feel it, how it's kind of greasy and, and it looks kind of sweaty. That's where the word came from. So you could press this tomorrow but these guys are going to need to be out here for at least a month, maybe 2.
When did they come in here, would you say?
The same time.
Same time.
But they're from different trees.
And taking a while, yeah.
And these are from bigger, older trees where there's more internal shade and the lack of sunlight delays the ripening. And that's why a high-density compact tree is going to give you way better fruit consistently than a big old, despite what a lot of people think. It's just not true.
Ears are ringing right now,
It's not
man.
true. I mean, and there's been a huge amount of research done on this by pomologists that you get the best, same thing with grapevines, you get the best fruit quality in a tree or a vine that's fairly narrow where the whole tree is full of sunlight. These came from older trees in the middle of the tree where they've been starved for sunlight, and you're not going to get the flavor out of this apple.
No doubt.
So the Steve's thing about, you gotta have, there's only so much flavor per acre, and you gotta have mauling 111 trees.
Takes many apples to make an orchard.
It may be true for him, because he would have a hard time growing a high density orchard where he is.
Yeah.
But it's not true in most places in the world.
Is high density orchard the tall spindle? Is that what that?
That just refers to how many trees per hectare.
Okay.
So it's literally the density of trees.
Density.
There's a gazillion different pruning training systems.
What do you use in
We
here?
use the French system vertical axe. Tall spindle is like just a modification of vertical
I
axe.
see. Okay.
But there's like Y trellises and V trellises, and that's how pomologists get tenure is, doing some minor modification of a pruning system and publishing it and putting their name on it, and it's just kind of I used to tell my students that if you know like 3 things about the way fruit trees function or grapes, you'll understand all the training systems, because it basically has to do with light distribution. These things will be in this room. This room is, we hold it at 50 degrees, and that's a temperature where the fruit so you know about starch hydrolysis and all that stuff in apples?
Please.
An apple, there's actually a thing called the starch test you can do to demonstrate this. As apples are developing during the season, the tree is moving a sugar alcohol called sorbitol into the fruit. Then it gets turned into glucose and fructose or sucrose, and they get all linked together into starch. And starch is the primary storage form for carbohydrates in the tree and the fruit. The apples ripen, it's what's called a climacteric fruit. So the seeds, as the seeds mature, they produce ethylene, and the ethylene triggers this ripening process in the apple. And there's an enzymatic activity that turns starch as just a giant chain molecule, right? It's all little subunits, and they all get cut up into sugars. So we call it starch hydrolysis, and that's the critical thing that happens as almost any climacteric fruit ripens. So apples, pears, melons, bananas,
Right.
I mean, it's sort of the same. And so what you want for fruit quality and cider quality, if you're going to pick the apple and eat it, you want it to be fully ripe. If you're going to pick it and store it for a year and then ship it somewhere else in the world and sell it, then you want to pick pre-climacteric. So you want, because you're going to store the fruit and it's going to slowly metabolize in storage. But for cider making, you would not want to sell somebody as an eating apple, this apple. They would touch it, and literally your hands get greasy.
Yeah.
And it's going to be soft. It's going to be a little bit mealy. But what's happening is all the starch is hydrolyzed. It's all turned into sugar. So your sugar concentration is increasing as they sit in here, and the cells are beginning to get leaky because they're senescing, which is part of the ripening thing. And when they senesce and get leaky, a lot of the aromatic stuff is released. So the aromas, that's why it smells so good when you walk in here. That's ripening fruit. If this were a storage unit where you're going to keep it and sell it 6 months later, that would be a disaster, because you're trying to stop that process. But the idea in this room is that you're trying to give it the best environment so that the fruit can fully ripen. And we'll keep bringing stuff in here as we get into the harvest. It'll make a huge difference. I think that's one of the key things in our cider quality, is being able to get really ripe fruit that's still in good condition. It's not
Fantastic.
rotting,
Absolutely fantastic. I'm wondering, do you have any pears here? Do you do any pears?
We grow lots of pears.
Because they're pretty darn buggers, in terms of ripening.
Yeah, we had pears over there. Well, pears, that's a whole different story about the way pears ripen. And there's summer pears and winter pears, and the winter pears all need to be, you need to pick them. Avocados the same way. It won't ripen until you separate it from the tree.
Right.
And they're climacteric fruits. When you separate them, that triggers that seed ethylene production that I was talking about, which then it's an autocatalytic process. So you get a little bit of ethylene, and there's this cascade of reactions that like the ethylene content in an apple as it's ripening can go from 1/10 of a part per million to 100 parts per million in a day, because it's just this runaway reaction as they ripen.
So what causes an apple or a pear to fall from the branch, besides wind or something more abrupt?
Yeah, there are usually two different things. There's what we call push-offs, and I'll show you some push-offs when we get in the orchard. It's actually a big issue with a lot of cider varieties because they're very hard to thin. It's hard to adjust the crop load on the tree, and so you have this bunch of apples, and a lot of them, like Kingston Black, which drops a lot. See how short these stems are?
Yeah, really short.
So if these
close
are on
to
a
the
spur
apple.
like this, as the apple gets bigger, it literally forces itself off the spur.
And what's that called?
It's called push-off.
Push-off, okay.
Yeah. Like this is a Magog Red Streak. See, this apple,
It's a longer stem.
you're going to have much less push-off, because
Yeah.
or Gala or Jonagold, a lot of in the dessert apple market, there's been a lot of selection for this kind of stem, because you can let the apples hang in the tree, and
they're not touching other apples and getting kind of,
they won't push themselves off, so you don't get pre-harvest.
people don't like what they look like, yeah.
Pre-harvest drop is a real pain in the neck.
So there's push-off, and then
there's another plant hormone called abscisic acid, which the name comes from abscission. And there's so at the base of actually leaves, a lot of plant organs, at the base of the stem of the leaf or the So this was a flower stem, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know how apples grow?
Yeah.
And this is where the flower was. Those are the calyx remnants that were the little green things underneath the petals.
Yeah.
It gets pollinated. The flowers fall off. The pollen moves down in. The ovaries are down in the stem, and they get fertilized, and then they produce massive amounts of several different plant hormones that cause the stem to engorge. And this whole thing, it's stem tissue. It has nothing to do with, it's just the mother. The only part of this that is pollen and egg is the seed cavity, basically the seeds and the little things that get in your teeth, the locules where the seeds are.
Mm-hmm.
So that's your stem, and this hormone abscisic acid, which tends to be produced as the fruit ripens, causes an abscission layer to form on the stem, and then the tree drops the apple.
Ah, interesting.
And the chemical thinners that most commercial growers use, a lot of them work by stimulating
Chemical thinner. I've never heard of that.
Well, almost all apples in the world are chemically thinned in...
To drop, so it's kind of like a force dropped in a different way.
You're trying to persuade the tree to drop 3/4 of the apples on it, because if you don't, the tree will have way too much fruit.
Yeah.
You'll get a lot of push-offs, and next year you won't have any apples. The natural tendency of most apple varieties is biennial bearing. Huge crop one year, very little or no crop the next year. And cider apples are especially prone to doing that, a lot of the European cider varieties. Most dessert apples will still do it, but in general they're less biennial than cider fruit. So.
Fascinating, awesome. Thanks for filling me in on that and everybody else, because that's just, I don't know that much about apples. I really don't.
Well, you're learning.
Yeah,
This is how you learn.
Absolutely. Ah, yes, said so well by the professor himself. You got to keep on learning, and learning I do. Oh, it's a great world out there in Ciderville, no doubt. A big tip of the glass to Ian Merwin for taking the time with me that day. In fact, I returned there with Visit Ithaca later on that afternoon because it was a great opportunity to have an additional walkabout with Ian out in the orchard. And if you have the opportunity to visit Black Diamond, I really want to recommend you to do so. To walk in an orchard that is being nurtured and managed by a pomologist such as Ian is just, it's kind of something you got to do at least once in your lifetime, if not many more times. The apples there are, it's just amazing to look at these really super healthy apples and to just be in his presence and get so much information. While I was there, he handed me an apple called Sunburst. I'm going to put a photo of that up in the show notes. And that apple is a cross between the Gold Rush and Pristine. And Pristine is like a hybrid type of apple to begin with. This apple is coming out of Purdue, research there with Jules Janik. And it just is so beautiful. Oh my goodness. It's like you want to have a photo of it on your wall. Never mind eating it. It's delicious too. But so cool stuff happening there. And what an opportunity to show this slice of heaven that they have, that not only Black Diamond is creating around the Finger Lakes, but so many other cideries are doing the same in that area too. And I'll be continuing to roll out episodes from my time during the Finger Lakes Cider Week. Before I go there, though, I want to just talk about his ciders, which I did get to enjoy. In fact, I'm holding one of the ciders right now. This is an orchard-based cider. It's actually a sparkling cider, and it was both made with Ashmead's kernel, apples, and Renette Muskie. Really tasty cider. Man, it was so well balanced. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Cheers to the makers there, all the folks at Black Diamond for keeping on and helping to keep cider going up. And Ian, if you're listening, I look forward to kicking back some Kiev cider with you. I'm sure we'll be able to hunt down some either way and show you, maybe you just haven't had the right Kiev cider yet. Little inside joke there, Ciderville. All right, got a little bit more. I'll be right back. I have 2 reminders for you before we roll out. One is the New York International Cider Competition taking place in February. Get your cider in now early so you could just forget about it at the end of the year and start working on other things and just let the cider speak for itself. Check that out at nyicidercompetition.com. And don't forget to set the date to do some online shopping at the Cider Chat swag store for both Black Friday and Cyber Monday, where you could find some fun, loving cider swag to show you are into cider, having fun, and savvy about shopping early and saving money for buying more cider on the flip side of that. All right, I'm ready to roll out of here, everybody. Be well out there. This is Real Wind Color signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
We like cider. We like palms. We love orchards and having fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. Yes, there is. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh, yes, there is. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Yes, there is a reason why we do it like this. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the street, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. We like cider, we like palms, we like orchards, having some fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There's a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Yes there is. There is a reason. We like walking down the orchards, dancing in the street, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. Oh yeah. We like cider. Oh yes we do. We like palms. Oh yes we do. We love orchards, having some fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. There is a reason why we do it like this. Walking down the orchards, dancing in the street, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. Oh yeah. We like cider. We like palms. Oh yes we do. We like orchards, having some fun.